A little extra time here, I'm going to do an unsolicited commercial for events like this. I got to tell you, about 2 or 3 years ago, I started attending all these cool meetups, all of these terrific things that this amazing Minneapolis ecosystem provides us at a pretty low cost, mostly free or really affordable. Oh my God, it has made such a difference about why I'm standing here today. Honestly, it gave me the confidence and the network. Confidence is really such an important thing, right? I was definitely one of those people who was working in the background, wasn't talking to anybody because I didn't know anybody. And then you go to another one, you see some, a couple more faces, and then you go to another one, and then before you know it, you have that network. I think the word network is probably used 50 times today. Well, it starts here. It starts at events like this. Everybody get each other's cards or Twitter handles or LinkedIn's or whatever. It's fantastic. Anyway, I love this community of the Twin Cities because, I don't know, it makes things happen like this. So that's my quick unsolicited commercial. I didn't say that. All right, so I also won't do an unsolicited commercial about my business, but I do need to tell you a little bit about it just so you understand where I'm going with this topic of the lean startup principles. I launched this educational software company a little over a year ago, and it's really born out of the fact that I had been conducting educational research in schools and in communities on kids and families for about 25 years. And I was simultaneously raising a set of twins who are now 19 years old and had insight on kids and families and communities and schools. And those two things converged, obviously, when I had sort of an epiphany. And the epiphany was that there was a lot of stuff that I understood as an educational researcher that I was beginning to see that moms and other parents and even some educators seemed to have the benefit of sort of this insight from a 35,000-foot perch of studying other people. And I saw a gap in the market. That is, in fact, an epiphany, right? When you see a gap in the market, we thought, we can do this. We can fill this space in the market. So, because it's an educational, or it's a research-based idea, a lot of the thinking behind this comes out of research, I had the great benefit of receiving a National Science Foundation grant, a small business innovation research grant. Highly competitive thing, highly tedious, onerous thing to apply to. I have to say, I say it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but you almost have to have a PhD to write that stupid thing. It's so hard. It's kind of written for geeky academic types, but don't let that dissuade you. You can hire somebody to help you write that if you really want to go for it. I'd be happy to talk about that later. But anyway, I was fortunate enough to get $150,000 seed fund, non-dilutive, 6 months, and that got me to build the MVP. So got it in January, and the first 6 months of the year, I built the MVP. But what the National Science Foundation did to me is they took that 6 months, cut the time in half. In the first 3 months, they sent me through boot camp, Lean Startup Boot Camp. I spent a lot of time virtually. I mean, they had us doing webinars and phone calls. We had a boot camp instructor assigned to us, reading books and articles. I was like, I said I was going to build a company, but I'm going through this training camp. Oh well, so for 3 months I did that. And boy, am I ever glad that they made us do that, I have to say. So many of us would have just, dive headlong into what you think is the best thing in the world. And the learning that happened in those first 3 months was really critical to this. The second 3 months, oddly, of the 6 months that they funded us, I spent half that time applying for the next phase of funding because it took that much time to apply for the next phase of funding. So I felt like I was very little involved. I had to hire a lot of other people to help me build the first MVP because, as the CEO, you're the rainmaker and you're doing all these other things. But anyway, the takeaway from the Lean Startup boot camp is what I want to share with you because I really, really have now become a huge evangelist, a real believer in it. Okay, so if I could boil it all down, all of these books and all these webinars and the 3 months that I was with this instructor and all this other stuff, these are my takeaways, and we'll revisit these again at the end, and then I'll give you a deeper dive in the real, true startup principles. But this is what I took away from it. Number 1, don't build anything that people don't want. You will go out of business. Don't do it. You may be in love with it, your mother's in love with it, but don't do it if people don't want it. Don't spend a dime. Don't spend a dime. 2, you've heard this about the pain point. You gotta find the customer's pain point. You gotta know what is really, really hurting people. And then you're gonna fix it. And you're gonna fix it so well, you're gonna cover their pain with your salve so magically that they're gonna give you money for it. You're gonna fix their pain, and you'll get money for fixing their pain. You don't know what their pain is until you've really spent time out with your potential customers and out in the market. That's a huge part of lead startup. We'll talk about customer stuff. 3, you gotta separate your product from your business. And then I also think you gotta understand that there's a difference between a business and a startup. I gotta read the definition of this because it's pretty particular, but a business is an organization that sells products or services as a repeatable and scalable model, right? So you're selling services or products as a repeatable and scalable model. You're going to continue getting money for it. What a startup is an organization to search for that repeatable, scalable model. You're on a journey to find out what it is people are going to give you money for. You're searching for that. That's when you're in the startup. You start moving from startup into a business when you start making money repeatedly because you've hit the holy grail, which is the product market fit. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's not going to be repeated and scalable, therefore profitable, until you figure out what people are going to give you money for. And then finally, somebody gave me this advice really early on, and I just adore this piece of advice. I say it all the time because I think it's so key. Fall in love with your business, not just your product, or not only your product. You love your product, you love your idea, you love this thing you came up with. You do, you love it. And your mother loves it, your partner loves it. But if it's not going to fit in the market, and people aren't going to give money for it, then you don't have a business. And if you don't have a business, your product doesn't matter. You can love it, but nobody else does. And your business is what's going to make your product absorbed by the world, and that's what you want. You want the world to love your product. But you've got to separate your business from your product. And they do, in my mind, and for me anyway, it's 2 different parts of my brain. I totally get my product because it came out of my brain. I have had to learn how to run a business. I have had to learn so many things I never imagined I was going to have to learn. Oh my gosh, there's so many things, but you can do that. You can learn the business side, and you should learn the business side. And you should really understand. You can farm it out, but you should also understand a lot about it. All right, so those are sort of my highline learnings. But what I think the lean startup thing, why the lean startup thing really resonates with me, is that I'm a social science researcher. As Mike said, I have a PhD in education. I get research, I get the scientific method. And in effect, that's what it turns out the lean startup principles are, also known as agile development. It's kind of used interchangeably. But you first start out by making an observation. In my case, my observation was I saw what I understood about correlations and educational progressions and that sort of thing. Come on, a mom shouldn't have to have a PhD in education to know that. And I was seeing it, and I was realizing that other parents weren't aware of those sort of correlations, and when windows of opportunity were to close and that sort of thing. So you make that observation, but then you want to form a question around that, which is, what if? What if X? And then you want to very specifically articulate your hypothesis, because all of this is testing a product in the market is a hypothesis. So you articulate your hypothesis, conduct an experiment, of course, test your hypothesis, analyze the data against that hypothesis, and it's either going to be validated or invalidated. If it's validated, good for you, your first best guess on the right. If it's invalidated, you've got to start all over again. So it lines up really interestingly with the principles of the lean startup. Your observation is the gap in the market, right? You generally kind of come up with a product because I think you guys were saying that you needed this. I mean, just about everybody here has got a company that, like, if I only had this pain point, clearly other people have this pain point. That's a gap. That's a gap in the market that should be filled. And then to form your question, well, what if we had an app that coordinated carpooling? What if everybody had a much easier time about it? Articulating a hypothesis is a bunch of guesses. It's nothing more than that. It's just a bunch of hopefully informed, educated guesses, not random guesses, but it's going to come from either your lived experience or what you've been experiencing and hearing about. And then you're going to conduct your experiment. Now, typically experiments are conducted in labs, and even if you were creating a product that is built in a lab, the law of startup principles is get out of the lab. There's one scientist that I know through the National Science Foundation whose principal investigator actually put locks on the lab so nobody would go into the lab until they got out of the building. It's known in the lean world as GOTB. Not get out the code, but get out of the building. Get out of the building, onto the street, into the homes or the shops or wherever your customers are, and go interact with them, observe them, and listen to them. And with that, I'm going to take a commercial break on talking about the customers. This is such a big part of the startup learnings, the lean learnings, but unfortunately I'm not going to do it entirely justice, I'm not going to give it all the justice it deserves in a short amount of time, but just know that there are a variety of kinds of customers on a spectrum of sorts. We'll start at the top. There are end users. Those are in your customer segment, but they're not the one who's going to pay you to solve their pain. Then I'll give you an example. So with in my world, it's kids. I thought that kids were going to be my customers. They're not going to give me money, right? But kids use stuff, and then their friends start using stuff, and before you know it, there's like a big posse of them, and they're all using the stuff, and they started having influence on each other, so it gets to be this bigger customer base. And then if there's a real head honcho in that kid group, they'll start saying to their teacher or their parent or whatever, you gotta buy this thing, everybody's got it. And then the payer, let's say it's the parent, like, okay, I'll buy that thing, everybody seems to be buying. I'm a buyer, I'll put out the money for it. There's one more level of the customer base, and that's the decision maker, who might be the person that runs the budget, for example. Like, no, don't give the kids money for that, don't buy that stupid thing, that wasn't in the budget, we gotta make this decision about how we're gonna actually allocate the money. All of those are in the customer segment. And then there's one that you didn't even anticipate, the saboteur, and this is often in our blind spot. You don't always see the person who's going to be like, don't ever buy that product. That is so bad for kids. The kids, that's going to ruin the world if all American parents buy these stupid products for these kids. That voice can be very powerful, and it can put the end to a customer base. It can put the kibosh on all of it. My point is, you've got to really understand this all the segmentation about these different kinds of customers. But the people in the end who you're really going to zero in on is who's giving you the money. It is the payer and the buyer, as long as they're not sabotaged by some other voice or some other intervening pressure, as long as this decision maker goes along with that. I could, again, talk about my world, which is the educational software space. Students obviously would be the end users. Influencers would be the adults who guide students using my product, which is an educational mapping and educational planning tool. The recommenders are within the central office, the school district, who would be like the chief academic officer, who would recommend it to the superintendent. The superintendent is the one who would write the check. The decision maker is the school board. And the school board would say, we don't exactly have that in the budget, but if there's enough upward influence from the users and the counselors and the teachers and the superintendent, the school board would say, maybe you're right, maybe that's a good use of money, and the superintendent writes the check. So I have to learn that by doing my customer interviews and getting out of the building. And it's a really key moment where when you find that out. I'll tell you another story about the boot camp. When I was going through the 3 months of it, my instructor assigned us so many numbers of interviews that we had to go out to every week, and we had to report to him who we talked to and what segment they represented and what we learned from it. And I was like, oh gosh, I've got so many other things to do, but all right, I'll get out of the building. And one rule of thumb, by the way, is spend 20% of your week outside of the building. If you work 5 days a week, that's 1 day a week. If you work 7 days a week, it's a little less, but 20% of your time should be out in the field, out in the world, trying to figure these people out. And like I said, when I started out, I was thinking, well, my customers are the students. oh my gosh, it was about February when I realized maybe my customers are the school counselors. Oh, maybe my customers are they the parents? And I went through this whole thing until I got into the school district and I learned through the inner bureaucracy was like, well, she's the one who always tells the superintendent what to buy. And after I heard that after so many school districts that she or he, the academic officer, is the one who tells him what to buy, I was like, okay, I got to figure out this chief academic officer person. I wouldn't have known that. In the end, I conducted 70 interviews, and I am so glad I did. I learned a ton, and it caused in my mind and on paper a pivot. You've heard the word pivot. Caused me to redirect the business plan, my strategies, a lot of things. Very key commercial break that we had to take on these principles. So then the next principle is, all right, so you've been out in the field, you've been out in the market, you've been out on the streets talking to your customers. That's data. That's just data. That's the data that you're going to use to either validate or invalidate what you're originally thinking. And if you get it right the first time, that's amazing. But you're probably not going to. And be prepared for that. Be prepared to be wrong. That's why it's a guess. It's just a guess. You're not always going to be right. It's probably going to be invalidated. It just means you're going to go back into the cycle of things. You're going to go and repeat, or as they say, iterate. Goes back into the flow. This is basically what the scientific model looks like. It's an experimental design, and that's what the lean startup experience is. It's a guess, then you go and test it. It's either going to be validated or invalidated. Again, if it's validated, good for you, you're out in the market, you're scaling up, you're worth $1 zillion. If not, you're going to go back in the cycle. Now, I know software developers know this very well. You're constantly tweaking it, like, hey, customers, do you like it like this? No, okay, we're going to twist it around this way, and then you put it back out there. That's just part of the experiment. And I'll tell you, build time in for that. It's not a linear track, this business development, product development thing. It's not at all. Think of it more as like you lurch forward and you cycle back, and then you lurch forward maybe in an upward direction, but you cycle back and then you lurch forward again. Think of it like this curly, swirly line that's hopefully going in the upward direction, but I'm telling you, it's not linear. And when it is invalidated, that's when you're going to have your classic pivot. I'll give you an example about one of my more profound pivots, because I've been thinking about this product idea for a long time. More than 3 or 4 years ago, I originally thought of my product in a gamified way, because again, I thought my customers were kids, so I thought this has got to be a fun software tool. If they're going to be tracking their educational progress and that sort of thing, they've got to be engaged, so I want to gamify this thing. And I used Farmville as my model. I was thinking, it's going to be like Farmville, and I spent a lot of time, no money fortunately, but I spent a lot of time reading and studying, as I classically do, gamification theory, stickiness, what causes a kid or a user to go back to the product. And I spent a lot of time on that. And I studied the cost-benefit analysis of game design and all the different features and how they were going to get awards that was going to move them up to the next level. And I spent a year on that, thinking about it. Granted, I didn't spend any money. And then, by that time, Farmville was like, what's Farmville? I didn't even know what Farmville was. I thought, oh my God, I'm so glad I did not design a Farmville of educational tracking and planning. And it was through that experience where I pivoted again. I thought, no. A, I can't afford gamification, so what am I even doing? And B, it's not even timely anymore. And if Farmville's out in 1 year, the next cool idea is going to be out the next year. These things just move too fast. So I simplified my own business idea, my own product, and my own business. I mean, the product got simpler, and as the product got simpler, honestly, the business plan got clearer to me in a way. I had to boil it down to the simplest things. What do I know? What can I get access to? What is a common practice? What is something that doesn't need to be taught to these people? What is it that comes instinctively? What is already available to us that we can just simply harness? And honestly, that was the biggest profound pivot that I had before I even spent $1. So I can't say enough about how thinking through these things in a really scientific, deliberative, intentional way will save you money. Don't dive headlong into something, hiring people, spending money before you have really tested your their hypothesis and gotten out there in the field. All right, so the true classic, I give you my 4 versions, my boiled down version of the startup principles, but this is what they really look like. There's a business model canvas. I'm going to show you an example. Who's heard of the business model canvas? Have you done your business model canvas? Have you done it really? Have you done it many times? Like, have you gone out and tested whether you had your business model canvas right? That's an iterative process, and it's a template that you can download. We'll get to that, but anyway, it's a useful thing. And not only customer development, but customer discovery, and that's what I was talking about get out of the building part, discover your customers, and then you can develop them after you know who they are. Be really clear, articulate what your value proposition is, learn how to even write a value proposition. There's a formula to it. Even put a quantifiable number in your value proposition. Understand your customer segments, your channels. Ideally, if you really want to scale and grow, you've got to understand your channels. The customer relationship thing comes later on as you are moving more profitably through your business model, the revenue partners. All of that is this kind of information. Here's just a quick visual of the business model canvas that you can find online, developed by Alexander Osterwalder. But the resources that I've relied on, I have read this book by Eric Ries, The Lean Startup, more than twice. I'm a little embarrassed, actually, to tell you how many times I've actually read this. And then I have this little crush on Steve Blank. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen Steve Blank speak or anything. He wrote The 4 Stages of Epiphany, which I forgot to bring. I don't know too. But Steve Blank also, he's a professor at Stanford, so he's got a lot of stuff online, his lectures, templates, PowerPoints, videos. I went through a course on Udacity, in which Steve Blank marched us through every single tiny little unit of the Lean Startup Principles. It's a fantastic class that you can take online with Udacity. And he's like, I don't know, 68 years old with shaggy white hair and a big bushy mustache and a little bit of a lisp, and I just fell in love with him because he was so instructive, and I just hung on every word he did. He teaches it so well. So I would say, go to no other resource today, go to steveblank.com. His website is chock full of free stuff, downloadable, that sort of thing. So again, just let me recap what I really think can save you money and help you make your way through what I jokingly call the dork forest. And that is, don't build something that people don't want. They're not going to want my Farmville of educational planning and dashboard. They don't. I'm so glad I didn't build it. Figure out what their pain point is. Here's what my customer's pain point is. And that is that we've got data on kids all the time. They've got report cards. They've got test scores. They've got absentee rates. There's a whole bunch of data stored in what's called the student information system. But they're not data analysts. Parents aren't predictive analysts. School counselors aren't either, nor do they have the time. It's sort of like, what does the C mean? Is she going to go to college or not? I mean, she's in the 9th grade. What should I be thinking? They don't know that. But they worry about that. And they spend a lot of money on private counselors and after-school tutoring and summer workshops and stuff like that. I'm trying to develop a predictive, forward-looking map for them about what their likelihood of hitting some of their educational goals are. Because I know they're spending money. They spend $9 billion a year. Parents spend $9 billion a year on supplemental education, on top of their educational bills. So they're obviously feeling some pain and they need some salve. Separate your product from your business. I was so in love with my gamification that I lost a year of my life to it. I wasn't thinking like a business person. And then I have in fact tried and I am definitely falling in love with my business now. I do. I have my product, but I realize that product will probably look different next year. Some of those features and ideas I have will probably go away, and I gotta let go of that. Some other cool things are probably gonna pop in my mind because I had a lot of conversations with parents and educators and software developers, and I get excited about what I don't know and what could still come. So I'm definitely trying to let go of my idea of my product and really keeping my eye on the ball that I want this business to succeed so that this product